The bruise on Clara Mitchell's cheek had faded from purple to yellow, but the shame still burned fresh as morning coffee. She stood on the wooden platform of Riverside Station, clutching a carpet bag that held everything she owned, watching the 417 westbound disappear into the distance without her, again. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. This was the third time in 2 weeks. Third time Bernard Crenshaw had promised to take her west to California, to the new life he'd painted in words sweeter than honey. Third time he'd counted her ticket money, pocketed it, and left her standing alone while the train carried his promises into the sunset. But this time was different. This time, a man in a worn leather vest and faded denim had been watching from the shadows of the station house. This time, when the train pulled away and Bernard's laughter echoed from the passenger car window, someone had stayed behind. The cowboy didn't speak. He just tipped his hat and settled onto the bench like he had all the time in the world. Clara didn't know it yet, but her life was about to change in ways she'd never imagined. Clara's hands trembled as she counted the coins in her purse for the fourth time. 73 cents. Not enough for a hotel room, barely enough for a meal. The autumn wind cut through her thin wool coat, carrying the scent of wood smoke and the distant promise of snow. Riverside Station sat at the edge of nowhere, a weathered building surrounded by endless prairie that stretched toward mountains. She could barely see through the haze. She'd met Bernard Crenshaw 3 months ago at a church social in St. Louis. He'd worn a fine suit and spoken of opportunities in California, of orange groves and ocean breezes. He'd courted her with flowers stolen from other people's gardens and promises that cost him nothing to make. Clara, 24 and tired of mending other people's clothes for pennies, had believed every word. "You're too good for this place," he'd whispered during their evening walks along the Mississippi. "A woman like you deserves silk dresses and servants. Come west with me, Clara. Be my wife." She'd given him her savings. 3 years of stitching by lamplight, of skipping meals to save every coin. $237. A fortune to a seamstress who lived in a boarding house room smaller than most people's closets. Bernard had promised to buy their tickets, to arrange everything. All she had to do was meet him at Union Station with her belongings. The first time he'd left her, Clara had assumed it was a mistake. Perhaps he'd misunderstood, gotten on the wrong train. She'd waited 16 hours on a hard bench, certain he'd return to explain. When the station master finally approached her with pity in his eyes, suggesting she find lodging for the night, the truth had begun to settle like ice in her stomach. Bernard returned the next morning with apologies flowing like river water. His mother had taken ill, he explained. A telegram had called him away suddenly. He'd had no choice but to leave, no time to explain. The tickets were purchased for the following week. This time, everything would be perfect. Clara wanted to believe him. She needed to believe him. What was the alternative? Return to Mrs. Henderson's boarding house and admit she'd been fool enough to trust a man who spoke of love but disappeared like morning mist. Face the other seamstresses who'd warned her about men with smooth voices and empty pockets. The second time, Bernard's story involved urgent business in Denver. Someone had stolen his wallet on the train, he claimed, leaving him stranded for 3 days. He'd borrowed money from a kind stranger to return it for her. This time, he promised, they'd travel together. Nothing would separate them. Clara had begun to notice things by then. The way Bernard's eyes shifted when he spoke of their future. How his fine clothes looked worn around the edges, his boots scuffed beyond any recent shine. The manner in which he studied other passengers' luggage as if calculating its worth. But her savings were already spent, her room at the boarding house given up. She had nowhere else to go. The third abandonment had happened this morning. Bernard had been nervous, constantly checking his pocket watch and scanning the platform. When the conductor called All aboard. He'd kissed her cheek and promised to send for her luggage once they reached California. The train's whistle had blown, and in the confusion of steam and departing passengers, he'd simply vanished into the crowd. Clara had run alongside the train as it pulled away, her carpetbag bouncing against her hip, calling his name. Through a window, she'd glimpsed him in the passenger car, laughing with another woman, a blonde, in an expensive traveling dress who wore the kind of jewelry Clara had only seen in shop windows. Bernard's hand had rested possessively on the woman's waist, and his smile held the same warmth he'd once shown Clara. The truth had hit her like a physical blow. She wasn't Bernard's intended bride. She was his source of traveling money, nothing more. He'd been working his way west, station by station, finding lonely women with enough savings to fund his journey. Each time, he'd promised marriage and delivered abandonment. Now Clara sat on the platform bench, watching the sun sink toward the mountains, trying to decide whether to use her remaining coins for food or shelter. The station house would close soon, leaving her exposed to the October night. Riverside wasn't much of a town, a few buildings clustered around the railroad tracks, a general store, a saloon that looked more like a place to get robbed than fed. She'd noticed the other passengers' stares before they'd boarded their own trains. A woman alone, traveling without male protection, was automatically suspect. Either she was running from something shameful or running towards something worse. The whispers had followed her like persistent flies. Poor thing, third time I've seen her here. Must be waiting for someone who ain't coming. Probably one of those women. You know the kind. Clara knew what they meant. In their minds, a woman abandoned at a train station could only be one thing, a fallen woman, probably deserving of whatever fate awaited her. The assumption burned worse than Bernard's betrayal. She'd lived her entire life trying to be respectable, keeping her head down, her skirts long, her reputation spotless. Now strangers looked at her and saw moral failure written in her circumstances. The station platform emptied as the evening deepened. Clara pulled her coat tighter and tried to make herself invisible on the bench. She'd heard stories of what happened to women alone after dark in frontier towns. Men who preyed on desperation, who offered shelter in exchange for dignity. She had no illusions about her options if she couldn't find respectable lodging. A group of ranch hands emerged from the saloon, their voices carrying across the quiet street. They moved with the loose-limbed confidence of men who'd been drinking but weren't yet drunk. Clara tensed, preparing to run if they approached. Instead, they mounted their horses and rode out of town, leaving only dust and the distant sound of hoofbeats. The temperature was dropping. Clara could see her breath now, small puffs of vapor that vanished quickly in the dry air. Her feet had gone numb in her thin boots, and her empty stomach cramped with hunger. She counted her coins again, knowing the amount hadn't changed but hoping somehow she'd miscounted earlier. That's when she first noticed him. The cowboy sat on a bench on the opposite side of the platform, so still she might have mistaken him for a shadow if not for the occasional red glow of a cigarette. He'd been there when the train arrived, she realized now. Had watched the entire scene of her abandonment without moving or speaking. Most men would have approached by now, either to offer unwanted help or to take advantage of her vulnerability. This one simply sat. Clara studied him in the fading light. He wore working clothes, denim trousers, a cotton shirt, a leather vest that had seen years of use. His hat was pushed low over his face, but she could see dark hair curling at his collar, and strong hands resting calmly on his knees. Everything about him suggested patience, as if he could sit on that bench for hours without feeling the need to move or speak. The station master emerged from the building, keys jangling as he prepared to lock up for the night. He glanced at Clara with obvious discomfort. "Miss, you can't stay here after closing. Town ordinance." Clara nodded, though she had no idea where to go. "I understand. There's a boarding house 2 streets over." Mrs. Carmichael takes in travelers sometimes. His voice softened with what might have been kindness. Tell her Samuel sent you. She might extend credit till you can wire for money. Thank you. The station master locked the door and walked away, leaving Clara alone with the silent cowboy. The street lamps hadn't been lit yet, and the gathering darkness made every shadow potentially threatening. Clara stood, swaying slightly from hunger and exhaustion, and picked up her carpet bag. The cowboy's voice reached her as she started toward town. Carmichael's place burned down last month. Clara turned. He hadn't moved from his position on the bench, but his cigarette glowed brighter as he took a long draw. I'm sorry? The boarding house. Fire took it 3 weeks back. Samuel forgets sometimes. The cowboy's voice was quiet, with a drawl that suggested Texas or maybe Oklahoma. Nearest lodgings in Millfield, about 20 miles north. 20 miles. Clara felt the last of her hope drain away. She couldn't walk 20 miles in the dark, especially not in her condition. The carpet bag wasn't heavy, but she was weak from hunger and stress. Her boots weren't meant for long distances, and the prairie night would be cold enough to kill. I see. She tried to keep her voice steady. Thank you for telling me. The cowboy stubbed out his cigarette and stood. He was taller than she'd expected, with broad shoulders and the easy movement of someone comfortable in his own skin. In the dim light, his face was all angles and shadows, but his voice remained gentle. Hotel in town's no place for a lady traveling alone. Owners got a reputation for taking advantage. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She'd noticed the other passengers' stares before they'd boarded their own trains. A woman alone, traveling without male protection, was automatically suspect. Either she was running from something shameful or running toward something worse. The whispers had followed her like persistent flies. Poor thing, 3rd time I've seen her here. Must be waiting for someone who ain't coming. Probably one of those women. You know the kind. Clara knew what they meant. In their minds, a woman abandoned at a train station could only be one thing: a fallen woman, probably deserving of whatever fate awaited her. The assumption burned worse than Bernard's betrayal. She'd lived her entire life trying to be respectable, keeping her head down, her skirts long, her reputation spotless. Now strangers looked at her and saw moral failure written in her. Circumstances. The station platform emptied as the evening deepened. Clara pulled her coat tighter and tried to make herself invisible on the bench. She'd heard stories of what happened to women alone after dark in frontier towns. Men who preyed on desperation, who offered shelter in exchange for dignity. She had no illusions about her options if she couldn't find respectable lodging. A group of ranch hands emerged from the saloon, their voices carrying across the quiet street. They moved with the loose-limbed confidence of men who'd been drinking but weren't yet drunk. Clara tensed, preparing to run if they approached. Instead, they mounted their horses and rode out of town, leaving only dust and the distant sound of hoofbeats. The temperature was dropping. Clara could see her breath now, small puffs of vapor that vanished quickly in the dry air. Her feet had gone numb in her thin boots, and her empty stomach cramped with hunger. She counted her coins again, knowing the amount hadn't changed but hoping somehow she'd miscounted earlier. That's when she first noticed him. The cowboy sat on a bench on the opposite side of the platform, so still she might have mistaken him for a shadow if not for the occasional red glow of a cigarette. He'd been there when the train arrived, she realized now. Had watched the entire scene of her abandonment without moving or speaking. Most men would have approached by now, either to offer unwanted help or to take advantage of her vulnerability. This one simply sat. Clara studied him in the fading light. He wore working clothes, denim trousers, a cotton shirt, a leather vest that had seen years of use. His hat was pushed low over his face, but she could see dark hair curling at his collar. and strong hands resting calmly on his knees. Everything about him suggested patience, as if he could sit on that bench for hours without feeling the need to move or speak. The station master emerged from the building, keys jangling as he prepared to lock up for the night. He glanced at Clara with obvious discomfort. "Miss, you can't stay here after closing. Town ordinance." Clara nodded, though she had no idea where to go. "I understand. There's a boarding house 2 streets over. Mrs. Carmichael takes in travelers sometimes." His voice softened with what might have been kindness. "Tell her Samuel sent you. She might extend credit till you can wire for money. Thank you." The station master locked the door and walked away, leaving Clara alone with the silent cowboy. The street lamps hadn't been lit yet, and the gathering darkness made every shadow potentially threatening. Clara stood, swaying slightly from hunger and exhaustion, and picked up her carpetbag. The cowboy's voice reached her as she started toward town. "Carmichael's place burned down last month." Clara turned. He hadn't moved from his position on the bench, but his cigarette glowed brighter as he took a long draw. "I'm sorry? The boarding house. Fire took it 3 weeks back. Samuel forgets sometimes." The cowboy's voice was quiet, with a drawl that suggested Texas or maybe Oklahoma. "Nearest lodgings in Millfield, about 20 miles north." 20 miles. Clara felt the last of her hope drain away. She couldn't walk 20 miles in the dark, especially not in her condition. The carpetbag wasn't heavy, but she was weak from hunger and stress. Her boots weren't meant for long distances, and the prairie night would be cold enough to kill. "I see." She tried to keep her voice steady. "Thank you for telling me." The cowboy stubbled out his cigarette and stood. He was taller than she'd expected, with broad shoulders and the easy movement of someone comfortable in his own skin. In the dim light, his face was all angles and shadows, but his voice remained gentle. "Hotel in town's no place for a lady traveling alone. Owner's got a reputation for taking advantage." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Clara's stomach clenched with something beyond hunger. "What would you suggest?" "Got a ranch about 5 miles out. My sister keeps house for me and my crew. She'd put you up for the night, no questions asked." He paused, seeming to understand how his offer might sound. "Your choice, miss. Just thought you should know your options. A stranger's ranch. A woman alone with men she didn't know." Every story Clara had ever heard about the frontier included warnings about situations exactly like this. But the alternative was spending the night on the street or in a hotel where the owner preyed on desperate women. She studied the cowboy's face in the darkness, looking for signs of deception or predatory intent. His expression remained calm, patient. He didn't press his offer or step closer. He simply waited, as if he had all the time in the world for her to decide. "Your sister," Clara said finally. "She really wouldn't mind?" "Elena's got strong opinions about hospitality. She'd skin me alive if I left a lady stranded in town." There was warmth in his voice now, the first hint of humor she'd heard. "Besides, she gets lonely out there with just us cowboys for company. She'd probably keep you talking till dawn, just for the pleasure of female conversation." Clara made her decision the way people make all desperate choices, by closing her eyes and jumping. "That's very kind. I don't want to impose, but ... "No imposition. I'll get my horse." He walked toward the livery stable with the same unhurried pace he brought to everything else. Clara watched him go, wondering if she was making another terrible mistake. She'd trusted Bernard's smooth words and empty promises. How was this different? But as the cowboy returned leading a gentle-looking mare, Clara realized the difference was already clear. This man offered shelter without asking for anything. In return, he didn't make promises about their future or paint pictures of the life they could build together. He simply saw someone in need and extended basic human kindness. "What's your name?" she asked as he helped her mount the horse. Jack Morrison. He swung up behind her, careful not to touch her more than necessary. And you're Miss? Clara. Mitchell. Well, Miss Mitchell, let's get you somewhere warm. They rode out of Riverside under a sky full of stars, leaving behind the platform where Clara had been abandoned for the last time. She didn't know what morning would bring, didn't know if Jack Morrison was truly the decent man he seemed to be. But for the first time in months, she wasn't facing the darkness alone. The horse's hooves beat a steady rhythm against the hard packed earth, and the night air carried the scent of sage and distant rain. Clara found herself relaxing against Jack's solid presence behind her, her body finally releasing some of the tension she'd carried since Bernard's first betrayal. Whatever came next, it had to be better than what she was leaving behind. The Morrison ranch materialized from the darkness like something conjured from Clara's desperate prayers. Oil lamps glowed in the windows of a sprawling adobe house, and the warm light spilled across a well-tended yard where chickens roosted quietly in their coop. The scent of mesquite smoke drifted from the chimney, mixing with the earthy smell of horses and hay that spoke of prosperity and careful stewardship. Jack's mare picked her way carefully along a dirt road lined with fence posts that stood straight and true. Clara could make out the silhouettes of outbuildings, a barn, a bunkhouse, corrals where horses moved like ghosts in the moonlight. This wasn't the rough, thrown-together operation she'd expected from a frontier ranch. Someone had built this place to last with attention to details that spoke of pride and permanence. Elena will still be awake, Jack said, his voice low so as not to disturb the night's quiet. She keeps late hours when the crew's out on roundup. Worry makes her restless. Clara felt a flutter of anxiety. She'd imagined Jack's sister as an older woman, perhaps a widow who'd found refuge with her brother. But the way he spoke suggested someone younger, someone who might view Clara's arrival with suspicion or territorial protectiveness. What would she think of her brother bringing home a stranger, a woman abandoned at a train station, no less? The front door opened before they'd finished dismounting, spilling golden lamplight across the wooden porch. A woman stepped out, wiping her hands on a dish towel, her dark hair caught up in a practical bun that couldn't quite contain the rebellious curls escaping around her face. She was perhaps 30, with Jack's same steady brown eyes and an expression that managed to be both welcoming and fiercely protective. "About time you got back," Elena called, though there was relief rather than reproach in her tone. "I was starting to worry that the Henderson boys had decided to make trouble after all." "No trouble," Jack replied, helping Clara down from the horse with careful hands. "Elena, this is Miss Clara Mitchell. She found herself stranded at the station tonight. I hoped you might spare a room and a meal." Elena's sharp gaze took in Clara's travel-worn appearance, the carpetbag that held everything she owned, the exhaustion written in the lines of her shoulders. But instead of the judgment Clara had come to expect, she saw only immediate concern. "Of course, Lord child, you look ready to drop where you stand." Elena bustled forward, taking Clara's bag with one hand and her elbow with the other. "Come inside before the cold gets into your bones. Jack, see Rosie and then wash up. I'll have food on the table in 10 minutes. The interior of the Morrison house was a revelation. Clara had expected the spare functionality of a bachelor's dwelling. Perhaps a few pieces of rough furniture and little thought given to comfort. Instead, she found herself in a living room that spoke of feminine touches and genuine care. Woven rugs covered polished wooden floors, and books filled shelves built into the adobe walls. A fire crackled in a stone fireplace, and the furniture, while practical, showed the kind of attention to detail that came from someone who understood the difference between a house and a home. "Sit down before you fall down," Elena commanded gently, guiding Clara to a chair near the fire. "You want coffee or something stronger? You look like you could use both." Clara sank into the chair, feeling warmth seep into her bones for the first time in hours. Coffee would be wonderful, thank you. I don't want to impose. Nonsense. Jack was right to bring you here. No decent woman should have to spend a night alone in Riverside, especially not at Murphy's Hotel. Elena's tone turned grim. That man's got wandering hands and a convenient memory when it comes to collecting payment the next morning. The casual way Elena discussed such dangers made Clara realize how sheltered her life in St. Louis had been. She'd worried about gossip and reputation, not about men who preyed on stranded travelers. The frontier operated by different rules, where protection was a practical necessity rather than a social nicety. Elena disappeared into what Clara assumed was the kitchen, returning moments later with a steaming mug and a plate piled high with cornbread, cold beef, and pickled vegetables. "Eat," she ordered, settling into the chair across from Clara. "You can tell me how you ended up abandoned at our little station after you've got some food in you." Clara accepted the plate gratefully, trying not to reveal how desperately hungry she was. But Elena had fed enough cowboys to recognize starvation when she saw it. "When's the last time you had a proper meal?" "Yesterday morning," Clara admitted. Then realized how that sounded. "I mean, I had some crackers at the station, but ... Yesterday morning." Elena's voice carried the kind of controlled anger that Clara suspected could level mountains when fully unleashed. Someone's got a lot to answer for, leaving a lady in such a state. Jack returned from tending his horse, moving quietly so as not to interrupt. He'd washed the trail dust from his face and hands, and Clara noticed for the first time how young he was, perhaps 35, with the kind of weathered handsomeness that came from honest work under an open sky. His brown hair showed touches of gray at the temples, and his hands bore the calluses of a man who knew how to work leather and rope. "Miss Mitchell was telling me about her circumstances," Elena said, though Clara hadn't actually shared anything yet. "Someone left her stranded without proper provisions." Jack settled into a third chair, accepting his own plate from Elena with a nod of thanks. "3 times from what I gathered at the station. Same man each time." Elena's eyes flashed dangerously. 3 times? What kind of snake? She caught herself, glancing apologetically at Clara. "Forgive my language, but that kind of deliberate cruelty just burns me up." Clara found herself explaining the whole sordid story: Bernard's courtship, her life savings, the repeated abandonments. She left out some of the more humiliating details, but both Morrison's siblings were perceptive enough to fill in the gaps. Neither interrupted or offered empty reassurances. They simply listened, and their quiet attention felt more valuable than all of Bernard's flowery promises. "So he's working his way west, funding his journey with other people's savings," Elena summarized when Clara finished. "Taking advantage of women who don't have family protection or means to pursue him." "It's a common enough scheme," Jack added quietly. "Court a woman with modest means but no connections, promise marriage, take whatever money she can provide, then disappear. By the time she realizes what's happened, he's states away, starting over with someone new." The matter-of-fact way he described Bernard's betrayal somehow made it easier to bear. Clara had spent weeks wondering what she'd done wrong, how she could have been so foolish. But hearing it framed as a deliberate criminal enterprise rather than her personal failure lifted some of the shame she'd been carrying. The question now, Elena said, her practical nature asserting itself, is what Miss Mitchell wants to do next. You can't go back to St. Louis with 73 cents, and you certainly can't chase after that scoundrel with no resources. Clara stared into her coffee mug, watching the steam rise in delicate spirals. She'd been so focused on survival, finding shelter, avoiding immediate danger, that she hadn't considered what came after. Her old life was gone. Her savings were gone. Her reputation, such as it was, had probably been destroyed by her mysterious disappearances from the boarding house. What did a woman do when she'd lost everything but the clothes on her back? "I suppose I'll have to find work," she said finally, I'm a seamstress by trade. Perhaps someone in town needs clothing mended or altered. Elena and Jack exchanged a look that Clara couldn't quite interpret. There was communication in that glance, the kind of wordless understanding that came from years of shared responsibility and mutual trust. Riverside's not much of a market for fine needlework, Elena said carefully. Most folks out here make do with whatever they can patch together themselves. But there might be other opportunities. Jack leaned forward slightly. Elena's been talking about needing help with the house and the books. Ranch work keeps me and the crew busy from dawn to dusk, and she's been trying to manage everything alone since our housekeeper married and moved to Denver. It's more than one person can handle properly, Elena agreed. Cooking for 6 cowboys. Keeping the accounts, managing supplies, tending the garden, preserving food for winter. I've been looking for someone to share the load, but good help is hard to find out here. Clara felt a spark of something that might have been hope. You'd consider hiring me? But I don't know anything about ranch work. You don't need to know. About cattle, Elena said with a smile. You need to know about organizing, cooking, and managing a household. Can you do figures? I kept my own accounts in St. Louis. Nothing complicated, but I can add and subtract accurately. That's more than some of our suppliers can manage. The pay wouldn't be much room and board plus $20 a month, but it's honest work with people who won't take advantage. $20 a month was more than Clara had made as a seamstress, even working 12-hour days. But more than the money. The offer represented something she'd thought she'd lost forever, the chance to build a respectable life among people who didn't judge her by her circumstances. I'd be grateful for the opportunity, she said, meaning every word. But are you certain you want to make such an offer to someone you've just met? You don't know anything about my character or abilities. Jack's quiet voice held the first hint of humor she'd heard from him. Lady, anyone who's been abandoned 3 times and still has the strength to worry about propriety and other people's convenience has more character than most folks I know. Elena nodded emphatically. Besides, I'm a good judge of people. Have to be living out here. You've got honest eyes and work-hardened hands. That tells me everything I need to know about your character. The warmth in Elena's voice threatened to undo Clara's careful composure. She'd grown so accustomed to suspicion and judgment that simple kindness felt overwhelming. I won't disappoint you. I know you won't. Now let's get you settled for the night. Tomorrow we can discuss the details and show you around the place properly. Elena led Clara to a small but comfortable room at the back of the house. It contained a narrow bed with a patchwork quilt, a washstand with pitcher and basin, and a chest of drawers that had been lovingly maintained. A window looked out toward the barn and corrals, where Clara could see the dark shapes of horses moving peacefully. In the moonlight, there's fresh water in the pitcher and clean towels in the chest, Elena explained. The privy's out back, about 50 feet toward the creek. Breakfast is at sunrise. The crew works early hours, especially during roundup season. Clara set her carpetbag on the chest and turned to face her hostess. Elena, I can't thank you enough. Your kindness to a stranger isn't kindness, Elena interrupted gently. It's common sense. Good people help each other when they can. That's how civilization works, even out here in the middle of nowhere. After Elena left, Clara sat on the edge of the bed and tried to process the dramatic turn her circumstances had taken. This morning she'd been a woman with nowhere to go and no prospects. Tonight she had shelter, food, and the possibility of honest employment with people who treated her like a human being rather than a burden or opportunity. She unpacked her few belongings, hanging her spare dress on a peg behind the door and arranging her toiletries on the washstand. Everything she owned in the world fit easily into 2 small drawers of the chest. It was a sobering reminder of how completely Bernard had stripped away her material security. But as Clara washed her face in the cool water and prepared for bed, she realized that Bernard's betrayal had also freed her from something she hadn't recognized as constraining. In St. Louis, she'd lived a narrow, careful life dictated by social expectations and economic limitations. She'd worked the same job, lived in the same small room, associated with the same small circle of people. Her horizons had been defined by what was considered appropriate for a woman of her station. Now those boundaries were gone. She had nothing left to lose and everything to gain. The thought was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Clara lay down on the comfortable bed and pulled the quilt up to her chin. Through the thin walls, she could hear the quiet sounds of the Morrison siblings preparing for their own rest. Elena banking the fire, Jack's boots on the wooden floor as he checked the locks. It was the sound of people who cared for each other and their shared home, and it filled Clara with a longing she hadn't realized she'd been carrying. For the first time in months, Clara fell asleep without tears, without fear, and without the crushing weight of shame that had become her constant companion. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and uncertainties, but tonight she was safe, warm, and welcomed among people who expected nothing from her except honest effort. Outside her window, the wind sang through the cottonwoods that lined the creek, and somewhere in the distance, a night bird called to its mate. The sounds of the frontier night that had seemed threatening from the train station now felt like a lullaby, promising rest and the possibility of new beginnings. Dawn came early to the Morrison ranch, announced by the cheerful crowing of roosters and the distant lowing of cattle stirring in the pastures. Clara woke to sunlight streaming through her small window and the unfamiliar but comforting sounds of a working ranch coming to life. For a moment, disorientation clouded her thoughts. This wasn't her narrow boarding house room or the hard bench at Riverside Station. Then memory returned, bringing with it a flutter of nervous anticipation. She dressed quickly in her only clean dress, a practical brown wool that had served her well in St. Louis, but felt oddly formal in these surroundings. The mirror above the washstand reflected a face marked by recent hardships, hollowed cheeks, shadows under green eyes that had once sparkled with optimism. But sleep in a real bed had restored some color to her complexion, and for the first time in weeks, she didn't look like a woman on the verge of collapse. The sound of voices drifted from the kitchen, punctuated by the clatter of dishes and the sizzle of bacon in a cast-iron pan. Clara smoothed her hair, squared her shoulders, and stepped into her new life. Elena stood at a massive wood-burning stove, effortlessly managing multiple pans while keeping up a steady stream of conversation. With 3 cowboys seated around a scarred wooden table, the men looked up as Clara entered, touching their hat brims in polite acknowledgement before returning their attention to plates piled high with eggs, bacon, biscuits, and fried potatoes. "Perfect timing," Elena said, flashing Clara a warm smile. "Coffee's fresh, and there's plenty of everything. Cowboys eat like they're storing up for winter hibernation." One of the men, a grizzled veteran with silver whiskers and kind eyes, chuckled. "Now, Miss Elena, you know we work hard enough to earn our keep. Building fence ain't exactly parlor work." "This is Charlie Briggs," Elena said, handing Clara a steaming mug of coffee. "He's been with the ranch longer than Jack and I combined. Knows more about cattle than any man in 3 counties. Charlie stood respectfully as Elena made introductions. "Pleasure, Miss Mitchell. Heard you'll be helping Elena with the house management. About time she got some assistance. Been working herself to the bone, trying to keep up with all of us." The other 2 cowboys were introduced as Miguel Santos, a soft-spoken man with intelligent dark eyes who managed the horse breeding program, and Tommy Carlile, barely 20 and eager to prove himself worthy of riding with the experienced hands. All 3 men treated Clara with genuine respect. None of the leering or inappropriate comments she'd feared from rough frontier workers. Jack appeared as the men were finishing their breakfast, his hair still damp from washing and his shirt crisp despite the early hour. He moved through the kitchen with the easy confidence of someone completely comfortable in domestic spaces, pouring his own coffee and accepting a plate from Elena without any of the awkwardness some men showed around feminine domains. Morning. Miss Mitchell, sleep well. Very well, thank you. Better than I have in weeks. Clara meant it. The combination of safety, warmth, and genuine kindness had allowed her to rest more deeply than she'd thought possible. Good. Elena's got ambitious plans for getting you oriented today. Jack's eyes held a hint of amusement. Fair warning, my sister doesn't believe in easing people into responsibilities gradually. Elena swatted him with a dish towel. I believe in treating people like they have sense enough to handle real work. Unlike some ranchers who spend 6 months teaching a man to saddle a horse. The easy banter between the siblings, the respectful inclusion of the hired hands in family conversation, the absence of rigid social hierarchies, everything about the Morrison breakfast table spoke of people who valued competence and character over birth or background. Clara found herself relaxing in ways she hadn't since childhood. After the men left for their various duties, Elena began Clara's education in ranch management. The scope of responsibilities was staggering. Elena maintained detailed records of cattle births, deaths, and sales, tracked expenses for feed, supplies, and equipment, managed relationships with suppliers in 3 different towns, oversaw food preservation for the long winter months, and somehow found time to maintain a garden that provided vegetables for the entire operation. The key is organization, Elena explained, leading Clara through a pantry that would have made a hotel chef envious. Everything in its place, everything documented, and always thinking 3 steps ahead. Winter's coming, which means we need enough preserved food to last until spring. The crew will be working longer hours during roundup, so meals need to be hearty and ready when they come in. And we're expecting a visit from potential buyers next month, which means everything needs to look prosperous and well managed. Clara studied the neat rows of canned vegetables, the hanging sides of bacon, the sacks of flour and beans organized by type and purchase date. How do you keep track of it all? Ledgers. Lots of ledgers. Elena led her to a small office off the kitchen, where leather-bound books lined shelves above a desk covered with invoices and correspondence. Inventory, expenses, correspondence, employee records, breeding charts for the horses. Jack handles the cattle records, but everything else falls to me. The handwriting in the ledgers was Elena's neat, precise, with an efficiency that spoke of someone who valued accuracy above decoration. Clara studied the entries, recognizing the same careful attention to detail she'd applied to her seamstress accounts, but on a scale that dwarfed her previous experience. I can teach you the systems, Elena continued, but what I really need is someone who can think independently, make decisions when I'm not available, handle emergencies without panic, deal with suppliers who think they can take advantage of women. Have you had problems with that? Elena's laugh held no humor. Last month, Henderson's Mercantile tried to charge us 15% more than their standard rates because they assumed I wouldn't notice the markup. When I confronted them with their own price sheets from previous orders, they claimed it was an honest mistake. Funny how their mistakes always favor their profit margins. Clara had experienced similar attitudes in St. Louis, where shopkeepers automatically assumed women couldn't manage figures or notice discrepancies. But Elena had clearly developed strategies for dealing with such assumption strategies. Clara would need to learn if she was going to be effective in this role. The morning passed quickly as Elena showed Clara through every aspect of the house. Operations. The root cellar where vegetables would be stored through winter. The smokehouse where meat was preserved. The herb garden where Elena grew medicinal plants as well as cooking seasonings. The chicken coop where 24 hens provided eggs and occasionally Sunday dinner. Each area represented knowledge accumulated over years of frontier living. Which plants thrived in the local soil. How to recognize signs of disease in livestock. What supplies were essential versus convenient. Elena shared this information generously, but Clara sensed she was also being quietly evaluated. Could this city woman adapt to the demands of ranch life? Would she be overwhelmed by the physical requirements or intimidated by the isolation? Lunch was a simpler affair: cold beef sandwiches and pickled vegetables eaten at the kitchen table while Elena explained the weekly routines. Mondays were for laundry, a massive undertaking that involved heating water in large kettles and scrubbing clothes on washboards. Tuesdays were for baking bread and preparing meals that could be preserved for the rest of the week. Wednesdays were market days, when one of the cowboys would drive the wagon to town for supplies, and Elena would send along her shopping lists and letters to mail. The trick is staying ahead of the work instead of letting it pile up, Elena explained. Fall behind, and you'll spend all your time catching up instead of planning ahead. Clara nodded, making mental notes about schedules and priorities. The work would be demanding, but it wasn't beyond her capabilities. She'd managed her own household efficiently, even within the constraints of a single boarding house room. The scale was larger here, but the principles were the same: organization, consistency, and attention to detail. The afternoon brought Clara's first real test. A supply wagon arrived from Millfield with an order Elena had placed 2 weeks earlier. The driver, a heavy-set man with tobacco-stained teeth and an attitude that immediately set Clara's nerves on edge, began unloading boxes without checking them against the invoice. "Hold on," Elena said, stepping forward with her copy of the order. "Let's verify everything's correct before you leave." The driver spat into the dust. "Lady, I've been making deliveries for 15 years. I know how to load a wagon. I'm sure you do. But I also know how to count, and I've been shorted before." Elena's voice remained pleasant, but Clara detected steel underneath the courtesy. They went through the boxes systematically: flour, sugar, coffee, canned goods, fabric for new work shirts, medicine for the horses. Everything seemed correct, until they reached the final crate, which should have contained the specialized leather conditioner Jack had ordered for the saddles. "This is harness soap," Elena said, holding up a block wrapped in brown paper. "We ordered leather conditioner." The driver barely glanced at the item. "Close enough. Both clean leather." "No, it's not close enough. Harness soap is half the price of leather conditioner and doesn't provide the protection we need for expensive saddles." Elena's voice sharpened. "You'll need to replace this with the correct item. Can't do it. Wagon's already loaded for the next delivery. You'll have to make do or wait till next week." Clara watched the exchange with growing anger. The driver's dismissive attitude, his assumption that Elena would accept inferior goods rather than make a fuss, his barely concealed contempt for dealing with women, it all felt familiar from her encounters with Bernard's subtle manipulations. "Then you'll need to credit our account for the difference in price," Elena said firmly, "and provide written confirmation that the correct item will be delivered within 3 days." The driver's face flushed red. "Now see here, lady. No, you see here." Elena stepped closer, and despite being several inches shorter than the driver, she somehow managed to look down at him. "This ranch spends over $500 a year with your company. That's a substantial account, and we expect to receive exactly what we order at exactly the price we agree to pay. If that's too complicated for your delivery system, I'm sure Brennan Supply in Riverside would be happy to handle our business." The mention of a competing supplier got the driver's attention. He muttered under his breath while making notes on his invoice, clearly unhappy but unwilling to risk losing such a valuable customer. After he left, Elena turned to Clara with a rueful smile. "That's what I meant about suppliers thinking they can take advantage of women. You have to establish boundaries immediately and enforce them consistently, or they'll walk all over you. You handled that perfectly." I would have been too intimidated to confront him so directly. You'll learn. The key is knowing your own worth and not letting anyone convince you to accept less than you deserve. Elena's words carried weight beyond their immediate context, and Clara suspected they were meant as much for her personal situation as for future supply negotiations. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of instruction and demonstration. Elena showed Clara how to maintain the wood-burning stove, how to organize the massive weekly laundry, how to preserve vegetables in the root cellar. Each task required specific knowledge and considerable physical effort, but Clara found herself energized rather than overwhelmed. For the first time in years, she was learning skills that had immediate, tangible value. In St. Louis, her needlework had been a means of survival, something she did because she had no other options. Here, every task contributed to the success of the entire operation. Her efforts would help feed hard-working men, maintain equipment that kept the ranch running, ensure adequate supplies for the harsh winter months. As evening approached, the cowboys returned from their various duties, and Clara helped Elena prepare dinner. The kitchen filled with the rich aromas of beef stew, fresh biscuits, and apple pie made from fruit Elena had preserved the previous fall. The men talked easily among themselves while they waited, discussing the day's work, joking about Tommy's ongoing struggles to master roping techniques, planning tomorrow's tasks. Jack entered last, washing his hands at the basin before joining the others at the table. His presence changed the dynamic subtly, not through any assertion of authority, but simply because the others clearly respected his judgment and sought his input on various decisions. "How did Miss Mitchell's first day go?" he asked Elena while accepting a generous serving of stew. "She's a quick learner. Helped me sort out that delivery problem with Murphy's wagon, backed me up when he tried to substitute inferior goods." Jack's eyes found Clara's across the table. "Murphy giving you trouble again?" "Nothing I couldn't handle. But it's nice to have backup when dealing with men who think women don't understand the difference between quality merchandise and cheap substitutes." "Murphy's been testing boundaries since his father died and left him the business," Charlie observed. "Old man Murphy was honest as the day is long, but his son's got flexible ethics when it comes to turning a profit." "Well, he learned today that those flexible ethics won't work with this ranch," Elena said with satisfaction. Clara didn't flinch when he got belligerent. The praise warmed Clara more than she cared to admit. She'd spent so much time being told she wasn't enough, not pretty enough, not clever enough, not worthy of genuine affection. That simple acknowledgement of her competence felt revolutionary. After dinner, while the men played cards at the kitchen table and Elena finished cleaning up, Clara stepped onto the front porch to watch the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple. The day had been full of new experiences and small victories, but underneath her satisfaction lay a persistent worry. How long could this last? When would the Morrisons realize they'd made a mistake taking in a woman with no references, no family connections, no security beyond their continued goodwill? Bernard had taught her that kindness usually came with a price, that people's generosity often masked expectations she couldn't fulfill. But as she stood there watching stars emerge in the darkening sky, Clara allowed herself to consider a different possibility. Maybe some people really were what they appeared to be. Maybe Jack Morrison's patient strength and Elena's fierce loyalty were genuine rather than calculated. Maybe she had finally found a place where she could build something lasting instead of merely surviving from day to day. The sound of Elena's laughter drifted through the open door, followed by Jack's deeper chuckle as one of the cowboys apparently lost a particularly spectacular hand. It was the sound of family, of people who cared about each other's company and found joy in simple pleasures. Clara had forgotten that such contentment was possible. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and continued learning. But tonight, for the first time since Bernard's first betrayal, Clara Mitchell felt like she was exactly where she belonged. 3 weeks into October, The first snow dusted the mountains like powdered sugar on dark chocolate cake. Clara stood at the kitchen window watching ice crystals dance in the early morning light, marveling at how quickly the ranch had become home. Her hands moved automatically through the familiar routine of preparing breakfast for 6 hungry people, muscle memory already forming around tasks that had seemed overwhelming just weeks before. The changes in her own appearance surprised her most. Regular meals had filled out her hollow cheeks, and the physical demands of ranch work had strengthened muscles weakened by months of worry and poor nutrition. Her hair, once listless and brittle, now caught the lamplight with auburn highlights. She'd forgotten she possessed. But the transformation went deeper than physical restoration. Confidence had returned to her movements, purpose to her daily routines. Elena pushed through the kitchen door carrying a basket of eggs still warm from the henhouse, her cheeks flushed from the crisp morning air. Tommy's horse threw a shoe yesterday evening. Jack's going to ride into Riverside this morning to have it reset and pick up the mail. Thought you might want to send a letter to your friend in St. Louis. Clara's hands stilled on the biscuit dough she'd been kneading. She hadn't written to anyone since arriving at the ranch, hadn't even thought about the people she'd left behind. Mrs. Henderson at the boarding house had probably rented her room to someone else by now. The other seamstresses would have heard some version of her story, likely embellished with speculation about her moral character and the circumstances of her disappearance. "I'm not sure there's anyone who'd want to hear from me," Clara said. Finally, my departure from St. Louis wasn't exactly conventional. Elena set the egg basket on the counter and began selecting the largest ones for scrambling. People who judge you for circumstances beyond your control aren't worth maintaining correspondence with. But if there's someone who genuinely cared about your welfare, they might appreciate knowing you're safe and well. There was Margaret Sinclair, the widow who'd worked at the dress shop next to Clara's boarding house. Margaret had been kind, offering small courtesies and practical advice without prying into Clara's business. She'd been the closest thing to a friend Clara had possessed in St. Louis, not close enough to confide in Bernard's courtship, but someone who might worry about her sudden disappearance. Perhaps I will write a brief note, Clara decided, just to let someone know I'm well. Good. Jack won't leave for another hour, so you have time. The Cowboys arrived for breakfast with their usual jovial energy, stamping frost from their boots and warming their hands around steaming mugs of coffee. Clara had learned to read the subtle indicators of ranch life in their faces and posture, the satisfaction when cattle were thriving, the concern when weather threatened crops, the excitement when horse training showed promising results. This morning, Miguel wore the expression of a man with good news to share. "That bay mare we've been working with, Estrella, she's ready for saddle training. Yesterday she let me put the blanket on without so much as a sideways step." Jack looked up from his plate with interest. "That's faster progress than I expected. She was pretty skittish when Henderson brought her over. She just needed patience and consistency. Some horses have been handled rough before and need time to learn that not all humans mean harm." Miguel's dark eyes met Clara's briefly, and she wondered if he meant the observation to extend beyond horse training. Charlie chuckled around a mouthful of eggs. Speaking of Henderson, heard in town that his eldest boy got himself engaged to the banker's daughter. "Wedding planned for Christmas. Young love," Elena said with amusement. "I remember when I thought December weddings were romantic. Now I just think about how miserable it must be to travel in winter weather for a celebration." "You never wanted a Christmas wedding?" Tommy asked with the curiosity of youth. Elena's expression grew thoughtful. "I wanted a lot of things when I was 18. Most of them turned out to be based on romantic notions rather than practical considerations." Clara detected layers of meaning in Elena's words, hints of experiences that had shaped her current pragmatic outlook. Elena had never mentioned previous suitors or romantic disappointments, but her comprehensive knowledge of ranch management and her fierce independence suggested a woman who'd learned to rely on herself, rather than waiting for masculine protection. After the men left for their morning duties, Clara settled at the kitchen table with paper and pen, struggling to find words that would convey her current circumstances without revealing too much about the events that had brought her west. How did one explain abandonment and betrayal in terms that wouldn't invite gossip or pity? Dear Margaret, I hope this letter finds you well and that business at the dress shop continues to prosper. I wanted to let you know that I have left St. Louis and am now employed as a housekeeper on a cattle ranch in Colorado Territory. The work is demanding but rewarding, and I am fortunate to have found employment with people who treat their employees with fairness and respect. Please give my regards to Mrs. Henderson if you see her, and know that I think fondly of our conversations and your many kindnesses during my time in the city. With sincere good wishes, Clara Mitchell. The letter felt stilted and formal, but it conveyed the essential information without inviting questions she wasn't prepared to answer. Clara folded it carefully and wrote Margaret's address on the outside, hoping the postal system could carry this small bridge between her old life and new. Elena emerged from the pantry carrying a crock of preserved peaches, surveying Clara's letter-writing efforts with approval. Ready to tackle the weekly laundry? It's a big job, but the weather's perfect for line drying. Laundry day at the Morrison Ranch bore no resemblance to the delicate hand-washing Clara had done in her boarding house room. It involved heating massive quantities of water in copper kettles, scrubbing work shirts stained with everything from cattle blood to axle grease, and wrestling with bed sheets that required 2 people to manage properly. But Clara found unexpected satisfaction in the work's rhythm. There was something deeply peaceful about the repetitive motions of washing and rinsing, the transformation of soiled garments into clean ones, the sight of laundry fluttering like colorful flags against the brilliant blue sky. This was my mother's wash tub, Elena said, running her hand along the worn wooden edge of the largest vessel. She brought it west when she and Father first claimed this land. Said a woman needed proper equipment to maintain civilization, no matter how far from town she lived. How long have your parents been gone? Father died when Jack was 22 and I was 19. Mother lasted another 3 years, but I think she died of loneliness as much as pneumonia. They've been partners in everything, building the ranch, raising children, facing down all the challenges this country could throw at them. When he was gone, she just lost her fight. Clara wrung out one of Jack's work shirts, noting the careful mending where fabric had torn on barbed wire. It must have been difficult, taking over so young. Jack never hesitated. He'd been working alongside Father since he was 12, learning every aspect of ranch management. But I had to figure out the domestic side on my own. Mother had always handled the house, the cooking, the accounts. When she died, I realized how much I didn't know about running a household this size. You seem to have mastered it completely. Elena laughed, but there was weariness in the sound. I learned through trial and error. Burned more meals than I care to remember that first year. Nearly poisoned everyone with spoiled preserves because I didn't understand proper canning procedures. Made so many mistakes with the accounts that we almost lost money on our best cattle season. The admission surprised Clara. Elena always seemed so competent, so completely in control of every domestic detail. Learning that she'd struggled with the same challenges Clara now faced made her current expertise more impressive rather than less. Jack was patient, Elena continued. Never made me feel foolish for not knowing things I'd never been taught. And Charlie stepped in to help with cooking until I figured out how to feed 6 people properly. We survived that first year through stubbornness and luck in equal measure. They worked in comfortable silence for a while, the physical rhythm of laundry creating its own meditation. Clara found herself thinking about resilience, about how people adapted to circumstances that seemed impossible until they became routine. Elena had transformed herself from a sheltered rancher's daughter into a capable business manager. Perhaps Clara could make a similar transformation from abandoned seamstress to valued household manager. The sound of hoofbeats interrupted her thoughts. Jack rode into the yard leading the horse with the reset shoe, but his expression suggested the trip to Riverside had yielded more than just blacksmith services. He dismounted and approached the wash area with mail in his hand and concern in his eyes. "Letter for you, Clara, postmarked from St. Louis." Clara's hands went cold, despite the warm wash water. She'd only written to Margaret yesterday. This letter must have been sent before anyone in St. Louis could have known her current address. The handwriting on the envelope was unfamiliar, masculine, and the paper felt expensive beneath her wet fingers. Elena noticed her hesitation. "Bad news? I don't know. I wasn't expecting correspondence from anyone." Jack's voice was gentle. "Want me to read it first? Sometimes it's easier to hear difficult news than to discover it yourself." The offer was so considerate, so completely different from Bernard's assumption that Clara's affairs were his to manage, that she almost accepted. But part of reclaiming her life meant facing whatever it contained, pleasant or otherwise. "Thank you, but I should read it myself." She dried her hands carefully before opening the envelope, aware that both Morrisons were watching with protective concern. The letter was brief, written on legal stationery that immediately suggested official business. "Miss Mitchell, I am writing on behalf of my client, Mr. Bernard Crenshaw, who has asked me to locate you regarding a matter of mutual concern. Mr. Crenshaw indicates that you may be in possession of certain items that belong to him, including jewelry and personal effects that were inadvertently included in your belongings when you departed St. Louis. He wishes to arrange for the return of these items and is prepared to offer compensation for any inconvenience you may have experienced. Please contact this office at your earliest convenience to arrange a mutually satisfactory resolution. Respectfully yours, James Whitmore." Attorney at law Clara read the letter twice, her initial bewilderment giving way to outrage. Bernard's personal effects? The only jewelry she possessed was her mother's simple pearl earrings and a silver locket that had belonged to her grandmother. As for personal effects, her carpetbag contained nothing but her own clothes and toiletries. "Clara?" Elena's voice held sharp concern. "What is it?" Clara handed over the letter without comment, watching Elena's face darken as she read. Jack moved closer to read over his sister's shoulder, his own expression growing increasingly grim. "This is the man who abandoned you?" Jack asked quietly. "Bernard Crenshaw. The attorney claims I have his property, which is impossible since I never had access to his belongings." Elena's eyes flashed dangerously. "This is harassment, pure and simple. He's either trying to intimidate you into contact or hoping to extract money through false claims. But what if he's serious? What if he actually believes I took something?" Jack's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to making difficult decisions. "Then he can produce evidence of ownership and file proper legal charges. Sending threatening letters through attorneys is the action of someone who knows they have no legitimate claim." Clara felt the familiar weight of shame and fear settling around her shoulders. Even here, hundreds of miles from St. Louis, Bernard's influence could reach out to destroy the peace she'd begun to build. What if he traveled west to pursue his claims? What if he convinced authorities that she was a thief as well as a fallen woman? "He's trying to maintain control," Elena said firmly. "Men like that can't stand the idea that a woman might escape their influence and build an independent life. This letter is designed to make you feel guilty and frightened." "What should I do?" Jack and Elena exchanged one of their silent communications, reaching some mutual understanding that didn't require words. "Nothing," Jack said finally. "You don't respond to harassment. If Whitmore wants to pursue legal action, he can do it through proper channels with proper evidence. Until then, you ignore him. But what if, Clara?" Elena's voice was gentle but firm. "You've done nothing wrong. You took nothing that wasn't yours. This is Bernard's attempt to keep you tied to him emotionally, even though he's moved on physically. Don't give him that power." The simple truth of Elena's words hit Clara like a physical blow. Bernard had trained her to accept responsibility for his failures, to doubt her own perceptions, to assume she was always at fault when things went wrong. Even now, faced with obviously false accusations, her first instinct was to worry about what she'd done to deserve such treatment. "You're right," she said slowly. "He is trying to maintain control. And you're not going to let him," Jack added. "You've built a new life here based on your own efforts and merit. Don't let some snake from your past poison that with lies and intimidation." Clara folded the letter carefully and tucked it into her apron pocket. Tomorrow she would throw it in the fire and watch Bernard's latest manipulation turn to ash. But today she would finish the laundry with Elena, prepare dinner for people who valued her contributions, and continue building the life she deserved. As if sensing her need for normalcy, Elena returned to the washtub and picked up where they'd left off. "These work shirts take forever to dry in cold weather. We'll need to hang them close to the stove tonight." Clara joined her at the tub, finding comfort in the ordinary task and Elena's matter-of-fact assumption that life would continue normally despite Bernard's attempted interference. The warm water soothed her hands, and the steady rhythm of scrubbing helped calm her agitated thoughts. "Elena," she said quietly, "thank you for defending me without question, for believing I wouldn't steal from anyone. Clara, in 3 weeks you've proven yourself to be honest, hardworking, and completely trustworthy. Some stranger's letter isn't going to change my opinion of your character." The unconditional support meant more than Clara could express. She'd spent so long having her integrity questioned, her motives suspected, her decisions criticized. That simple trust felt like an unexpected gift. The afternoon passed peacefully despite the morning's disruption. Clara threw herself into domestic tasks with renewed energy, as if physical activity could burn away the lingering effects of Bernard's attempt to reach into her new life. She baked bread, organized the pantry, mended tears and work clothes, and helped Elena plan meals for the following week. By evening, when the Cowboys returned tired and hungry from their various duties, Clara had reclaimed her equilibrium. She served dinner with her usual efficiency, participated in the table conversation, and felt genuinely present in the moment rather than haunted by past fears. Jack lingered in the kitchen after the others had retired, helping Clara with the final cleanup while Elena tallied the day's expenses in her ledgers. "That letter is still bothering you?" he asked quietly. "Less than it would have a few weeks ago. I'm learning to trust my own judgment about people and situations." "Good. That's probably the most valuable skill anyone can develop, knowing when to listen to outside opinions and when to trust your own instincts." Clara dried the last plate and hung the dish towel on its peg. "Jack, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why did you wait at the station that night? You could have just ridden home after seeing what happened, but you stayed. Why?" Jack was quiet for so long Clara thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight of memory. "Had a sister once, older than Elena. She got involved with a man who made promises he never intended to keep. When he left her, she had nowhere to go and no one who'd take her in. Family turned their backs because of the scandal. What happened to her? She died that winter, alone in a charity hospital in Denver." Jack's jaw tightened. "I was 15, too young to help even if I'd known where she was. Swore them that if I ever had the chance to help a woman in similar circumstances, I wouldn't turn away." The revelation explains so much about Jack's immediate response to Clara's situation, his patient kindness without expectation of reward. He wasn't trying to rescue her. He was honoring a promise made to the memory of someone he'd been too young to save. "I'm sorry about your sister. Her name was Catherine. She would have liked you, I think. She had your same determination too." make the best of difficult circumstances. Clara felt the weight of that comparison, the responsibility of living up to the memory of someone who deserved better than she'd received. But it wasn't a burden, it was an honor, a reminder that her own survival and success honored all the women who hadn't been given second chances. That night, Clara burned Bernard's letter in the kitchen stove, watching the expensive paper curl and blacken until nothing remained but ash. The flames consumed his final attempt to control her narrative, leaving her free to write her own story from this point forward. Outside her bedroom window, snow fell steadily, blanketing the ranch in pristine white that would cover the tracks of yesterday while creating a clean slate for tomorrow's possibilities. November arrived with the kind of brutal cold that transformed the ranch into a crystalline landscape where every breath formed clouds and the wind carried promises of the harsh winter ahead. Clara had grown accustomed to rising before dawn to stoke the fires, her movements efficient in the pre-dawn darkness as she prepared for another day of demanding but satisfying work. The rhythm of ranch life had become second nature. The early morning bustle of feeding cowboys, the midday quiet when the men were scattered across distant pastures, the evening gatherings around the kitchen table where conversation flowed as freely as Elena's strong coffee. But underneath this comfortable routine, Clara sensed subtle changes in the household dynamics, particularly in her interactions with Jack, where once his kindness had felt safely impersonal, motivated by basic decency and the memory of his lost sister. Now Clara detected something deeper in his attentiveness, the way his eyes lingered on her face when she spoke, how he found excuses to remain in the kitchen after the other men had retired, the careful consideration he gave to her opinions about ranch matters that had nothing to do with domestic management. Clara told herself she was imagining things, reading significance into gestures that meant nothing more than friendly respect. Bernard's betrayal had taught her to distrust her own perceptions about masculine attention. But when Jack began bringing her small gifts, a book of poetry from his personal collection, wildflowers that had somehow survived the early frost, a carved wooden thimble he'd commissioned from Charlie's woodworking skills, she could no longer pretend his interest was purely fraternal. The realization terrified her. Elena noticed, of course. Elena noticed everything that happened within the boundaries of her carefully managed domain. But instead of the jealous protectiveness Clara might have expected from a sister guarding her brother's affections, Elena seemed pleased by the developing attraction. "Jack's been alone too long," she observed one afternoon as they prepared preserves from the last of the fall apples. "He's always been so focused on ranch responsibilities that he's never made time for personal happiness." Clara concentrated intently on peeling apples, avoiding Elena's perceptive gaze. "He strikes me as someone who's naturally solitary. Some people prefer independence to the complications of romantic attachments. Some people convince themselves they prefer independence because they've never found someone worth the risk of vulnerability." Elena's tone suggested the observation applied beyond her brother's situation. But everyone deserves companionship with someone who appreciates their true character. The conversation made Clara uncomfortable, not because Elena's approval wasn't welcome, but because it forced her to acknowledge feelings she'd been trying to suppress. She was attracted to Jack Morrison, deeply, dangerously attracted in ways that went far beyond gratitude for his rescue. His quiet strength, his patient wisdom, his complete absence of the manipulative charm that had blinded her to Bernard's true nature. Everything about Jack represented the kind of man she'd dreamed of finding before cynicism had convinced her. Such men didn't exist, but attraction and possibility were entirely different things. Clara had nothing to offer a man like Jack beyond domestic skills and a willingness to work hard. No dowry, no family connections, no social standing that would enhance his position in the community. She was damaged goods, a woman whose reputation had been compromised by circumstances beyond her control. What could she possibly give him that would compensate for the scandal of associating with someone like her? The answer came unexpectedly during the first blizzard of the season. Clara woke to an eerie silence that could only mean heavy snowfall had muffled the usual sounds of ranch life. Her bedroom window revealed a world transformed. Snow drifted against the buildings in sculpted waves, and the familiar landscape had disappeared beneath a white blanket that made navigation treacherous. The kitchen was already warm when Clara arrived to begin breakfast preparations, indicating that Jack had risen even earlier than usual to ensure adequate heat throughout the house. She found him stoking the massive stove, his hair tousled from sleep and his expression concerned. "Storm hit harder than expected," he said without preamble. "Wind's been howling since midnight, and the temperature's dropped 20 degrees. We'll need to check on the cattle in the near pastures, make sure none are trapped in drifts." Clara nodded, automatically adjusting her meal preparations to account for men who would be working in brutal conditions. Hot food, plenty of it, and something that would provide sustained energy for demanding physical labor. She began mixing batter for extra biscuits, while Jack continued feeding wood into the stove's hungry maw. "Elena's still sleeping," he said quietly. "She was up most of the night helping Miguel with a mare that's having trouble foaling. I didn't want to wake her unless it was absolutely necessary." The admission created an unexpected intimacy in the pre-dawn kitchen. Just the two of them working in harmonious silence, Clara preparing sustenance while Jack ensured warmth and safety. It felt deeply domestic in ways that had nothing to do with employer and employee relationships. Charlie appeared first, stamping snow from his boots and shaking ice crystals from his beard. "Damnedest storm I've seen in 5 years. Snow's 3 feet deep in places, and it's still coming down hard." Tommy and Miguel arrived together, both looking grim about the weather conditions. "Lost sight of the barn twice just walking from the bunkhouse," Tommy reported. "Visibility may be 10 feet in this wind." "We'll work in pairs," Jack decided. "No one goes out alone in these conditions. Check the cattle first, then make sure all the horses are secure. If anyone gets disoriented, follow the rope lines back to the buildings." Clara served breakfast quickly, knowing the men needed to begin their dangerous work before conditions worsened further. But as they prepared to leave, Elena finally appeared, looking exhausted but determined. "How's the mare?" Jack asked immediately. "She delivered a healthy colt around 3 this morning. Both are doing well, but I need to check on them again before the storm gets worse." Elena accepted coffee gratefully, wrapping her hands around the warm mug. "Miguel, I may need help moving them to the main barn if the foaling stall isn't warm." "Enough. Of course, Senorita. We'll check the cattle first, then help with whatever you need." The men departed into the swirling whiteness, their figures disappearing within moments of leaving the porch. Clara watched from the kitchen window, anxiety knotting her stomach as she realized how easily someone could become lost in such conditions. The storm had transformed the familiar ranch yard into an alien landscape where even experienced men could lose their bearings. Elena joined her at the window, sharing the same worried vigil. "This is the part of ranch life I hate most. Sending good men out into dangerous conditions because the animals depend on us. Have you ever lost anyone in weather like this?" "Not on this ranch, but I've heard stories. Ranchers who went out to check cattle and weren't found until spring thaw. It's always a risk when you live this far from town." The words sent ice through Clara's veins. The thought of Jack disappearing into that white wilderness, of never seeing his quiet smile or hearing his gentle voice again, was unbearable. When had he become so essential to her sense of security and happiness? Hours passed with agonizing slowness. Clara threw herself into domestic tasks, baking enough bread to feed an army and preparing a massive pot of stew that could simmer all day. Elena moved restlessly between the kitchen and the barn, checking on the new mother and colt while trying to peer through the storm for signs of the returning men. By afternoon, when the wind had reached howling intensity and the snow showed no signs of abating, Both women were fighting panic. The men had been gone for 6 hours, far longer than necessary to check the nearby cattle. Something had gone wrong. "I'm going to saddle a horse and look for them," Elena announced, reaching for her heavy coat. "In this weather? Elena, you could get lost within 100 yards of the house. I can't just sit here while they might be in trouble." Jack would do the same if the situations were reversed. Clara grabbed Elena's arm before she could reach the door. "Then we go together. 2 people have a better chance than 1, and I won't let you risk yourself alone." Elena studied Clara's face, reading the determination there. "You've never been out in a blizzard. It's more dangerous than you can imagine. I don't care. If Jack is hurt, if any of them are hurt, I need to help find them." The declaration surprised them both. Clara hadn't intended to reveal the depth of her feelings so plainly, but fear had stripped away her careful emotional defenses. Elena's expression softened with understanding. "You love him." It wasn't a question, and Clara saw no point in denial. "Yes, I know it's foolish. I know I have nothing to offer him, but—" "Nothing to offer?" Elena's voice rose with incredulous anger. "Clara, you've transformed this household. You've brought organization, efficiency, and genuine warmth to our daily lives. You've proven yourself capable, trustworthy, and completely devoted to our family's welfare. What more could any man want in a partner?" Before Clara could respond, the kitchen door burst open, admitting a gust of Arctic wind and 3 snow-covered figures who might have been Yetis, if not for their familiar voices. Charlie, Tommy, and Miguel stumbled inside, stamping their feet and shaking off accumulated ice. "Where's Jack?" Elena demanded immediately. "Found a heifer trapped in a drift about 2 miles out," Charlie reported through chattering teeth. "Jack stayed to dig her out while we came back for rope and a sled. He'll need help getting her back to shelter." Clara was moving before conscious thought directed her actions, pulling on Elena's spare coat and wrapping a scarf around her head. "I'll go with you." "Clara, no," Miguel protested. "The storm's too dangerous for someone inexperienced. I'm going." Her voice carried an authority that surprised everyone, including herself. "Argue if you want, but you're wasting time Jack doesn't have." Elena stepped beside her, already dressed for the brutal weather. "She's right. Let's go." The journey to find Jack was a nightmare of swirling snow and biting wind that seemed determined to strip the warmth from their bodies despite heavy clothing. Clara followed Miguel's horse by holding onto a rope, her world reduced to the few feet of visibility around them and the desperate need to keep moving forward. They found Jack where Charlie had indicated, but the situation was worse than reported. The heifer was free from the snowdrift, but Jack was slumped against a fence post, his face gray with exhaustion and cold. He'd clearly been fighting the storm for hours, and his strength was nearly depleted. "Jack!" Clara reached him first, her hands immediately going to his face to assess his condition. His skin was dangerously cold, his lips tinged with blue that spoke of advancing hypothermia. "Clara?" His voice was barely a whisper. "What are you doing here?" "Saving your stubborn hide," she replied with false lightness, her heart breaking at his weakened state. "Can you stand?" With help from Miguel and Tommy, they got Jack onto the sled alongside the rescued heifer. Clara insisted on walking beside him during the treacherous journey back, holding his hand through thick gloves and talking constantly to keep him conscious and oriented. "Stay with me, Jack. Think about spring, about the new calves that will be born, about Elena's terrible cooking that you're too polite to criticize." Her voice remained steady despite her terror. "You're not allowed to give up now, not when I've finally found someone worth loving." The confession seemed to reach him even through the fog of hypothermia. His grip on her hand tightened slightly, and she thought she saw a ghost of his familiar smile. Back at the ranch house, they moved Jack to the bedroom closest to the kitchen stove while Elena prepared hot baths and warming drinks. Clara refused to leave his side. helping to remove his frozen clothing and wrapping him in heated blankets. She chafed his hands and feet, massaging circulation back into extremities that had been dangerously close to frostbite. "You came out in the blizzard," Jack murmured when he was finally warm enough to speak clearly. "That was incredibly dangerous." "So, I was staying out there alone trying to save one cow. She was trapped. I couldn't leave her to die." Clara looked into his honest brown eyes and saw the fundamental decency that had driven him to risk his own life for a suffering animal. This was who Jack Morrison was, a man who couldn't walk away from responsibility, even when it endangered him personally. "I know," she said softly. "It's one of the reasons I love you." The words hung between them like a bridge neither had expected to cross so soon. Jack's hand found hers beneath the warming blankets, his fingers intertwining with hers in a gesture that felt like a promise. "Clara ... His voice held wonder and something deeper. "I've been wanting to tell you how I feel, but I didn't know if someone like you could care for someone like me." "Someone like me?" "Jack, I'm a woman with no family, no fortune, no reputation. You're a successful rancher with property and standing in the community. If anyone should worry about worthiness, it's me." Jack struggled to sit up, his expression earnest despite his continued weakness. "You think I care about fortune or reputation? Clara, you're the strongest, most remarkable woman I've ever known. You've faced abandonment and betrayal with dignity, rebuilt your life through sheer determination, and shown more courage in one afternoon than most people demonstrate in a lifetime. I was terrified the entire time. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what needs to be done despite the fear." Elena appeared in the doorway carrying a tray of hot soup, her timing impeccable as always. "How's our patient?" "Warming up nicely," Clara replied. Though she made no move to release Jack's hand, Elena set down the tray and studied the joined hands with satisfaction. "Good. About time you two stopped dancing around your feelings and admitted the obvious." "Were we that transparent?" Jack asked with amusement. "Jack, you've been moon-eyed over Clara since the day you brought her home. And Clara's been stealing glances at you like a schoolgirl with her first crush. Everyone on the ranch has been waiting for you to wake up and do something about it." Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Everyone knew?" "Charlie started a betting pool on when Jack would finally work up the courage to court you properly. Tommy bet on Christmas, but Charlie thought you'd need a crisis to push things along." Elena grinned. "Charlie's about to win a month's wages." The revelation that their growing attraction had been so obvious to everyone else was mortifying and somehow liberating simultaneously. Clara had spent weeks worrying about propriety and appearances, while the entire household had been quietly rooting for romance to blossom. "So what happens now?" Clara asked, looking between the siblings. Jack's thumb traced across her knuckles in a gesture so tender it made her breath catch. "Now I court you properly, with Elena's permission to use the front parlor for Sunday visits and flowers when the weather permits." "Jack Morrison," Elena said with mock severity, "if you think Clara needs formal courting after she risked her life to save yours, you're denser than I thought. The woman clearly adores you, and you're obviously besotted with her. Skip the formal nonsense and get to the important part." Clara looked at Jack expectantly. His brown eyes held all the warmth she'd dreamed of seeing, along with something deeper and more lasting than passion. "Clara Mitchell," he said formally, though his voice shook slightly with emotion, "would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" The storm still raged outside, wind howling around the ranch buildings with primitive fury. But inside the warm kitchen, surrounded by the people who had become her family, Clara had never felt safer or more loved. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, with all the joy and certainty filling her heart. "Yes, Jack Morrison, I would be honored to marry you." When he kissed her, gentle and reverent despite the passionate undercurrent, Clara finally understood the difference between love and possession. Jack offered partnership instead of ownership, respect instead of control, patience instead of demands. With him, she would never again have to fear abandonment or question her own worth. The blizzard would rage for 2 more days, trapping them all inside the ranch house. But Clara spent those days planning a future instead of merely surviving the present, her heart finally free to dream again. Spring arrived late that year, as if winter had been reluctant to release its grip on the high country. Clara stood in the kitchen garden, watching green shoots push through the last patches of snow with the same determined optimism she'd discovered in herself over the past months. Her engagement ring, a simple band with a small sapphire that had belonged to Jack's grandmother, caught the morning sunlight as she worked the soil, preparing beds for vegetables that would feed the Morrison household through another year. The ring had sparked a flurry of excitement when Jack had presented it on Christmas morning, 5 months after his proposal during the blizzard. Elena had cried with joy. The Cowboys had offered hearty congratulations, and even taciturn Charlie had been moved to compose a toast that lasted nearly 5 minutes. The wedding was planned for June, allowing time for the spring work to be completed, and for Clara to finish the dress she was sewing from fabric Elena had ordered specially from Denver. Life had settled into the kind of peaceful rhythm Clara had never dared imagine possible. Her days were filled with meaningful work, her evenings with the companionship of people who valued her contributions, and her future secured by the love of a man who treated her like a cherished partner rather than a convenient acquisition. The frightened woman who had been abandoned at Riverside Station seemed like someone from another lifetime, which made the letter Elena brought from town that afternoon all the more jarring. "Mail wagon brought this," Elena said, her expression troubled as she handed over an envelope addressed in Bernard's familiar handwriting. "Postmarked from Denver 2 weeks ago." Clara's hands trembled slightly as she accepted the correspondence. Her hard-won peace instantly threatened by the sight of her former tormentor's script. She'd heard nothing from Bernard or his attorney since burning that threatening legal letter months ago, and had begun to hope he'd moved on to victimize other women in other cities. "Want me to read it first?" Elena offered gently. "No, I need to face whatever this is." Clara tore open the envelope with decisive movements, refusing to let Bernard's reappearance reduce her to the fearful woman she'd once been. The letter was longer than his attorney's previous communication, written on hotel stationery from Denver's finest establishment. Bernard's tone was conciliatory, almost apologetic, as he explained his presence in Colorado and his desire to make amends for past misunderstandings. "My dearest Clara, I hope this letter finds you well and that you can forgive the circumstances that led to our unfortunate separation last year. I have spent these months in California, as planned, where business opportunities exceeded even my most optimistic expectations. I am now in a position to offer you the comfortable life I always promised, free from the financial concerns that caused our previous difficulties. I have recently learned of your employment with the Morrison family and must confess my relief at discovering you safe and well cared for. However, I cannot bear the thought of you working as domestic help when you were meant to be my cherished wife. I am prepared to overlook any irregularities in your conduct during our separation and to proceed with our original wedding plans. I will be traveling to Riverside within the week to escort you to Denver, where we can be married immediately and begin our new life together in California. I trust you will be ready to depart upon my arrival, as I have already made arrangements for our journey west, with renewed affection and anticipation." Bernard Crenshaw. Clara read the letter twice, her initial shock giving way to a cold fury that surprised her with its intensity. Bernard's arrogance was breathtaking, his assumption that she would simply abandon her new life to resume their previous relationship, his patronizing tone about overlooking irregularities, his complete disregard for the possibility that she might have moved beyond his influence. "Well?" Elena asked, watching Clara's face for clues about the letter's contents. He's coming here, to Riverside. He expects me to go with him to California as if nothing has happened." Clara's voice remained steady despite the rage building in her chest. "He says he's willing to overlook my conduct during our separation." Elena's eyes blazed dangerously. "His willingness to overlook your conduct? The unmitigated gall of that man. What conduct, exactly? Working honestly to support yourself after he abandoned you 3 times? He sees my employment here as something shameful, as if taking honest work was somehow beneath the woman he intended to marry." Clara crumpled the letter in her fist. "He still thinks he owns me, that I exist solely for his convenience." The kitchen door opened to admit Jack, returning from a morning spent checking fence lines in the upper pastures. His expression brightened at the sight of Clara until he noticed the tension crackling between the 2 women. "Problem?" he asked simply. Clara handed him the crumpled letter without explanation. Jack smoothed it out and read silently, his face growing progressively darker with each paragraph. When he finished, he folded the paper carefully and set it on the kitchen table. "When?" he asked. "Within the week, according to this." Jack nodded once, his expression settling into the kind of calm determination Clara had learned to recognize as his most dangerous mood. "We'll be ready for him." "Jack, I don't want trouble. If Bernard wants to make a scene—" "He's not taking you anywhere," Jack interrupted quietly. "And he's not going to intimidate you into leaving voluntarily. Whatever happens when he arrives, you're under the protection of this family." Elena moved to stand beside her brother, presenting a united front that made Clara's heart swell with gratitude and belonging. "We won't let him hurt you, Clara. Not with words, not with threats, not with legal manipulation. You're one of us now." The unwavering support of the Morrison siblings gave Clara strength to face what was coming. She was no longer the desperate woman who had once believed Bernard's promises because she had no alternatives. Now she had a home, work that mattered, people who valued her for herself rather than what she could provide them. Bernard no longer held any power over her circumstances, but she also knew that men like Bernard didn't accept rejection gracefully. If he couldn't persuade her to leave willingly, he might resort to other tactics: legal threats, public embarrassment, or worse. She'd heard stories of spurned suitors who became violent when their assumed ownership was challenged. The week passed in tense preparation. Jack quietly arranged for Charlie and Miguel to remain close to the ranch house during daylight hours, while Tommy was assigned to patrol the outer boundaries and watch for approaching riders. Elena helped Clara rehearse responses to various scenarios, coaching her on maintaining dignity while firmly rejecting Bernard's overtures. "Remember," Elena advised during one of these sessions, "you don't owe him explanations or justifications. You don't need to defend your choices or prove that you deserve better treatment. Simply state your position and refuse to be drawn into arguments." Clara practiced the words until they felt natural. "I am engaged to be married to Jack Morrison. I will not be traveling to Denver or anywhere else with you. Please respect my decision and leave us in peace." Simple, clear, impossible to misinterpret. But Clara suspected Bernard would find ways to complicate even the most straightforward rejection. He arrived on a Thursday morning in early May, driving a hired buggy from Riverside and dressed in the kind of expensive clothing that was meant to impress provincial observers. Clara watched from the kitchen window as he approached the ranch house, noting how he'd gained weight during their separation and how his face had acquired the soft look of someone who spent his time in saloons rather than honest work. Bernard stepped down from the buggy with theatrical flair, straightening his coat and checking his pocket watch before approaching the front door. He moved with the confident swagger of someone who expected his mere presence to resolve the situation in his favor. Jack answered his knock before Bernard could raise his hand a second time. Clara could hear their voices from the kitchen, but couldn't make out words. The conversation was brief and apparently one-sided, with Jack doing most of the talking while Bernard's responses grew increasingly agitated. The kitchen door opened to admit both men, with Jack maintaining a position between Bernard and Clara that was subtly protective without being obviously confrontational. "Clara, my dear." Bernard's voice carried the same honeyed tone that had once charmed her, but now she could hear the calculation underneath the sweetness. "How wonderful you look. Country living clearly agrees with you." He moved as if to embrace her, but Clara stepped backward, maintaining distance between them. "Hello, Bernard. I received your letter." "Then you know why I'm here. I've come to take you home, to give you the life you deserve." His eyes swept the modest kitchen with obvious disdain. "Surely you're ready to leave this rustic existence behind and embrace the opportunities waiting for us in California. This is my home now. I'm engaged to Mr. Morrison and will be married next month." Bernard's expression flickered between surprise and annoyance before settling back into patronizing concern. "Clara, my dear, I understand that desperate circumstances may have led you to make rash commitments, but we both know you don't truly wish to spend your life as a rancher's wife in the middle of nowhere. Actually, I do wish exactly that. I've found genuine happiness here." "Happiness?" Bernard laughed, the sound holding no warmth. "My dear girl, you don't know what happiness is. I'm offering you silk dresses, servants, a house in San Francisco with ocean views. What can this provincial rancher offer you that could possibly compare?" Clara felt her carefully prepared composure beginning to crack under the assault of Bernard's condescension. He was deliberately trying to make her feel small, to remind her of the financial insecurity that had once made his promises appealing. Jack stepped slightly forward, his voice calm but carrying unmistakable authority. "Mr. Crenshaw, Miss Mitchell has made her position clear. I think it's time for you to respect her decision and leave." Bernard turned his attention to Jack for the first time since entering the kitchen, his assessment openly contemptuous. "And you are?" "The local sheriff? A concerned neighbor? I'm the man she's going to marry. Ah, yes, the rancher." Bernard's tone made the word sound like an insult. "Tell me, do you really think you can provide for a woman of Clara's refinement? Can you give her the luxury she deserves, the social position that befits her gentle breeding?" "I can give her respect, faithfulness, and a partnership built on mutual trust," Jack replied evenly. "Things she apparently didn't receive from you." Bernard's mask of civility slipped, revealing the cold calculation beneath. "I see Clara has filled your head with romantic nonsense about her supposed mistreatment. The truth is that she agreed to accompany me west, accepted my financial support, and then abandoned our arrangement when a better opportunity presented itself." "That's a lie," Clara said sharply. "You abandoned me 3 times, taking my money and leaving me stranded." "Your money?" Bernard's laugh was ugly now. "My dear Clara, you seem to have forgotten that you gave me that money willingly, as my intended bride contributing to our shared future. Legally, morally, it was mine to use as I saw fit." Elena entered the kitchen at that moment, carrying a shotgun with the casual competence of someone who knew how to use it. "Gentlemen," I couldn't help overhearing raised voices. "Is there a problem here?" Bernard's eyes fixed on the weapon with obvious alarm. "Madam, surely there's no need for firearms in a civilized discussion." "Oh, this isn't for you," Elena said pleasantly. "I was just cleaning it when I heard shouting. Sometimes predators wander onto ranch property, thinking they can take what doesn't belong to them. We found that a visible deterrent encouraged them to move along peacefully." The threat was unmistakable despite Elena's mild tone. Bernard's face reddened with anger and embarrassment at being so obviously outmaneuvered by a woman with a gun. "Clara," he said, his voice tight with controlled fury, "I'm prepared to be generous about this unfortunate situation. Come with me now, and we'll never speak of your time here again. Refuse, and I'll be forced to take legal action to recover my stolen property and protect my reputation." "What's stolen property?" Clara demanded. The money you took from our joint resources, the breach of our engagement contract, the damage to my standing in the community when you disappeared without explanation. Bernard's threats came faster now, desperation creeping into his voice. I have witnesses who can testify to our agreement, documents that prove your obligations to me. Jack moved protectively closer to Clara. Those sound like threats, Mr. Crenshaw. In this territory, threatening a woman under the protection of her intended husband is considered a serious offense. Intended husband? Bernard's voice rose to a near shout. She was promised to me first. Whatever arrangement you think you have with her is legally invalid. She was already contracted to another man. I was never contracted to you, Clara said. Firmly, you made promises you never intended to keep while stealing my life savings. Any obligations I might have felt toward you ended the moment you left me stranded for the third time. You can't prove any of that. It's your word against mine. And who will believe a woman of questionable reputation over a respected businessman? Elena's shotgun shifted slightly, still not pointing directly at Bernard, but no longer resting casually against her shoulder. In this county, people will believe whatever Jack Morrison says. His word carries considerably more weight than that of a stranger who makes threats against women. Bernard looked around the kitchen, finally realizing that he was outnumbered and outgunned in every way that mattered. His attempted manipulation had failed, his legal threats had been dismissed, and his assumption of automatic male authority had crumbled against the united front of people who valued Clara's welfare above social conventions. This isn't over, he said finally, his voice containing equal parts rage and defeat. I have resources, connections. I can make your lives very difficult if you insist on this foolish course. Mr. Crenshaw, Jack said quietly, you have exactly 10 minutes to get off my property before I have you arrested for trespassing and harassment. And if you ever contact Miss Mitchell again, in person or through intermediaries, I'll make sure. Every rancher between here and California knows what kind of man you really are. Bernard's face went white with fury, but he was smart enough to recognize when he'd been thoroughly defeated. He stalked toward the door, pausing only to deliver one final threat. You'll regret this, Clara. All of you will regret crossing me. The only thing I regret, Clara called after him, is wasting a single day believing your lies. She watched through the window as Bernard climbed back into his hired buggy and drove away, his posture radiating frustrated anger. For several minutes after his departure, the kitchen remained silent except for the ticking of Elena's mantel clock. Finally, Jack spoke. Are you all right? Clara considered the question seriously. Was she all right? She'd just faced down the man who had once held complete power over her dreams and aspirations. She'd rejected his renewed manipulation, stood firm against his threats, and emerged from the confrontation with her dignity intact. I'm better than all right, she said wonderingly. I'm free. Elena leaned the shotgun against the wall and pulled Clara into a fierce hug. You were magnificent. The way you stood up to him, refused to be intimidated. I was so proud of you. I couldn't have done it alone. Knowing you and Jack were behind me made all the difference. Jack joined their embrace, his arms encompassing both women with protective warmth. He won't be back. Men like that are bullies at heart. They only fight battles they're certain to win. Clara nodded, feeling the last lingering fears from her past finally dissolving. Bernard had represented everything she'd once thought she wanted: financial security, social respectability, protection from an uncertain world. But his version of security had come with chains, his respectability with humiliation, his protection with possession. Jack offered her something infinitely more valuable: the freedom to be herself without apology, to contribute her strengths without surrendering her independence, to build a partnership based on mutual respect rather than economic necessity. 1 month until the wedding, she said, looking at the ring that represented promises she could trust. 1 month, Jack agreed, his voice warm with anticipation and absolute certainty. Outside, spring continued its inevitable march towards summer, bringing new life to the land and new possibilities to the people who called it home. Clara had finally, completely, left her past behind and was ready to embrace the future she'd chosen, and that had chosen her in return. The morning of Clara's wedding dawned with the kind of pristine beauty that seemed orchestrated by divine providence. June's sunshine streamed through her bedroom window, painting everything in shades of gold and promise, while a gentle breeze carried the scent of wildflowers from the meadows beyond the ranch buildings. Clara stood before the mirror in her chemise, studying her reflection with wonder at how completely her life had transformed. The woman looking back at her bore little resemblance to the hollow-eyed, defeated creature who had been abandoned at Riverside Station 8 months ago. Her cheeks glowed with health and happiness, her green eyes sparkled with confidence, and her auburn hair caught the morning light like burnished copper. But the most dramatic change was in her posture, the proud set of her shoulders, the lifted chin, the absence of the apologetic hunch that had once marked her as someone expecting rejection. Elena burst through the door, carrying Clara's wedding dress. Her face flushed with excitement and the organized chaos of managing a celebration that had grown far beyond the simple ceremony they'd originally planned. Word of the wedding had spread throughout the county, and what had begun as a quiet family affair had evolved into a genuine community celebration. "The dress looks perfect," Elena announced, hanging the creation carefully on the wardrobe door. "Mrs. Peterson from the general store said she's never seen finer needlework, even from the seamstresses in Denver." Clara had spent countless evening hours crafting her wedding gown from ivory silk. Elena had ordered from the finest shops in Colorado Springs. The dress was elegantly simple-fitted bodice with pearl buttons, modest neckline appropriate for a frontier wedding, full skirt that would photograph beautifully but wouldn't be impractical for ranch life. Every stitch had been placed with love and anticipation for this day. "Are you nervous?" Elena asked, beginning to arrange Clara's hair in an intricate style they'd practiced for weeks. "Terrified," Clara admitted. "Not about marrying Jack. I've never been more certain of anything in my life, but about standing in front of half the county and promising to love and honor someone when everyone knows my history." Elena's hands stilled in Clara's hair. "What exactly do you think people know? That I was abandoned by another man? That I arrived here with nothing, not even a proper recommendation? That I'm marrying above my station?" "Clara Mitchell," Elena said firmly, meeting her eyes in the mirror, "let me tell you what people actually know. They know you've transformed the Morrison household from a barely functioning bachelor establishment into a model of efficiency and hospitality. They know you worked alongside Jack and the crew during the worst blizzard in 5 years, never complaining about the hardships. They know you've proven yourself to be honest, capable, and completely devoted to this family." Elena resumed working on Clara's hair, her voice growing warmer. "More importantly, they've seen how Jack looks at you. That man has been alone for 35 years, never showing interest in any woman despite half the county trying to catch his attention. Then you arrived, and suddenly he's walking around with a smile that could light up Denver. People aren't wondering if you're worthy of Jack Morrison. They're grateful that someone finally made him happy." The words eased some of the anxiety knotting Clara's stomach. She'd been so focused on her own perceived inadequacies that she'd failed to consider how others might view their relationship. From the outside, theirs was a love story, two people who'd found each other against impossible odds and built something beautiful together. Knock at the bedroom door interrupted her thoughts. "Clara?" Jack's voice carried through the wooden barrier. "May I speak with you for a moment?" Elena rolled her eyes with fond exasperation. "Jack Morrison, you know perfectly well that the groom isn't supposed to see the bride before the ceremony. It's bad luck. I'm not asking to see her. I just want to talk, please." The unusual note of uncertainty in Jack's voice made Clara's heart skip. In 8 months, she'd never heard him sound anything but completely confident about their relationship. What could be troubling him on their wedding day? "All right," Clara called. "But stay on that side of the door. I wanted to give you something. It was my mother's and my grandmother's before that. Elena can pass it through." Elena opened the door just wide enough to accept a small velvet box, which she handed to Clara with curious eyes. Inside, nestled on faded silk, lay a delicate gold locket engraved with tiny flowers and birds. It was clearly old, worn smooth by decades of loving hands, but still beautiful in its simple elegance. "It's lovely," Clara breathed, lifting the locket carefully from its case. "There's more," Jack's voice continued through the door. "Open it." Clara pressed the tiny catch, and the locket sprang open to reveal 2 miniature portraits. On one side was a young woman with dark hair and kind eyes who could only be Jack's mother. On the other side, instead of the expected portrait of his father, was a small piece of paper with writing so tiny Clara had to squint to read it. "True love waits," the inscription read, "and forgives and endures, and transforms everything it touches." "Jack wrote that," Elena said softly, reading over Clara's shoulder. "The night before he asked you to marry him. He wanted you to know that real love, isn't about finding someone perfect. It's about finding someone perfect for you." Clara's eyes filled with tears that threatened to ruin Elena's careful work on her hair. "Jack, it's beautiful. But this is a family heirloom." "Are you certain you are family?" his voice interrupted gently. "You have been since the night I brought you home. The locket belongs to the woman who makes this house a home, and that's you." Elena wiped Clara's eyes carefully before the tears could fall. "Now go away, Jack Morrison, before you make her cry and ruin my masterpiece. You'll see her at the altar in 2 hours." They heard his footsteps retreating down the hallway, but his presence seemed to linger in the room like a promise. Clara fastened the locket around her neck, where it settled perfectly at the base of her throat, as if it had been waiting all these years to find its rightful owner. Thought the next hour passed in a whirlwind of final preparations. Elena helped Clara into her dress, the silk sliding over her shoulders like water and settling into perfect lines that enhanced every curve while maintaining absolute propriety. The locket gleamed against the ivory fabric, catching the light with each breath. "One last thing," Elena said, producing a small bouquet of white roses and baby's breath, tied with cream-colored ribbon. "Jack rode out at dawn to cut these from the wild rose bushes by the creek. He said you mentioned once that you'd always dreamed of carrying roses at your wedding." Clara accepted the bouquet with trembling hands, overwhelmed by Jack's attention to details she'd barely remembered mentioning. Bernard had never noticed her preferences or dreams, but Jack had been quietly cataloging every wish she'd ever expressed, storing them away to fulfill when the moment was right. Through the bedroom window, Clara could see guests arriving at the ranch. Neighbors from surrounding spreads, townspeople from Riverside and Millfield, even the sheriff who defended her against Bernard's threats months ago. The front yard had been transformed with tables laden with food, chairs arranged in neat rows. Facing an arch, Elena and the Cowboys had constructed from pine boughs and wildflowers. "Ready?" Elena asked, smoothing the final wrinkles from Clara's skirt. Clara took a deep breath, studying her reflection one last time. The woman in the mirror was radiant, confident, loved. She was ready to make promises she could keep to a man who would never abandon her, never betray her trust, never make her question her own worth. "I'm ready." They descended the stairs together, Elena leading the way while Clara lifted her skirts carefully to avoid tripping. The house buzzed with activity as neighbors' wives arranged last-minute details, and cowboys, who'd scrubbed themselves within an inch of their lives, attempted to look comfortable in their best clothes. Charlie waited at the bottom of the stairs, wearing a suit Clara had never seen before and an expression of nervous pride. Jack had asked him to escort Clara down the aisle, and the gruff cowboy had been practicing his role with the seriousness of someone entrusted with precious cargo. "Miss Clara," he said formally, offering his arm, "you look beautiful enough to stop traffic in Denver. Thank you, Charlie. And thank you for agreeing to walk with me. It means more than you know." Charlie's weathered face softened. "It's an honor, miss. Jack's lucky to have found you, and you're lucky to have found a man who sees your true worth." They made their way toward the front door, where Alina paused to make final adjustments to Clara's dress and bouquet. Through the open doorway, Clara could see the assembled guests turning in their chairs, conversations quieting as they prepared for the ceremony to begin. And there, standing beneath the flower-draped arch with the preacher beside him, was Jack. He wore a black suit that emphasized his tall frame and broad shoulders, his dark hair neatly combed, but already showing signs of nervous fingers running through it. But it was his expression that took Clara's breath away, pure joy mixed with reverence, as if he couldn't quite believe his good fortune, but was determined to treasure every moment of it. Their eyes met across the assembled crowd, and everything else faded into insignificance. The guests, the decorations, the carefully planned ceremony, none of it mattered, compared to the love shining in Jack's face and the absolute certainty that filled Clara's heart. She belonged here. She belonged with him. After years of feeling like an outsider looking in at other people's happiness, she had found her place in the world. The wedding march began, played on Elena's piano by Mrs. Henderson from the general store. Clara and Charlie moved slowly down the makeshift aisle, Clara's eyes never leaving Jack's face. With each step, her past fell further behind and her future grew brighter. When they reached the altar, Charlie placed Clara's hand in Jack's with a gentle pat and stepped back to join the other cowboys. Jack's fingers intertwined with hers, warm and steady and completely trustworthy. "Dearly beloved," the preacher began, but Clara heard his words through a haze of happiness. This was really happening. After everything she'd endured, everything she'd lost, everything she'd thought was impossible, she was marrying a man who loved her exactly as she was. The vows they'd written together were simple but profound. "I promise to stand beside you through whatever challenges we face," Clara said, her voice clear and strong. "To be your partner in building a life based on mutual respect and shared dreams. To trust in your love even when circumstances test our faith. And to never forget that true strength comes from supporting each other rather than trying to control each other." Jack's vows brought tears to many eyes. "I promise to value your independence while offering my protection, to encourage your dreams while sharing my own, to see you as my equal partner in all things. I promise to wait for you when you need time, to follow your lead when you see the way more clearly, and to love you not for what you can give me, but for who you are." When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Jack's kiss was gentle and reverent, a promise sealed before God and community. The assembled guests erupted in cheers and applause, but Clara heard only the beating of her own heart and Jack's. Whispered, "I love you, Mrs. Morrison." Mrs. Morrison, Clara Morrison. The name felt perfect on her lips, not because it replaced her own identity, but because it represented a partnership freely chosen and joyfully embraced. The celebration that followed was everything Clara had never dared to dream of. Tables groaned under the weight of dishes contributed by neighbors who had accepted her as one of their own. Fiddle music filled the air as couples danced on the wooden platform the cowboys had constructed in the barn. Children ran between them, but adults, their laughter adding to the festive atmosphere. Clara moved through it all in a daze of happiness, accepting congratulations from people who genuinely wished her well, watching Jack beam with pride as he introduced her as his wife. No one questioned her worthiness or whispered about her past. She was simply Clara Morrison, beloved wife of Jack Morrison, valued member of the community. As evening approached and the celebration began to wind down, Clara found herself standing on the front porch with Jack, watching their guests apart in wagons and on horseback. The mountains glowed purple in the sunset, and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. "Happy?" Jack asked, his arm around her waist. "Beyond words," Clara replied, leaning into his warmth. "Jack, 8 months ago, I thought my life was over. I had no hope, no future, no reason to believe things would ever get better. And now?" Clara looked around at the ranch that had become her home, thought about the work that gave her purpose, considered the love that had transformed her understanding of what marriage could be. "Now I know that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you can lead to the best thing that ever happens to you. Bernard's abandonment brought me here, to you, to this life. If I had to go through all of that again to end up where I am right, now I would do it gladly." Jack turned her in his arms, his brown eyes serious in the fading light. "You'll never have to go through anything like that again. Whatever challenges we face, we'll face them together." "Together," Clara agreed, standing on tiptoe to kiss her husband Dot as they stood there in the growing darkness, surrounded by the sounds of their land and secure in their love. Clara thought about all the women who were still waiting at stations, still believing promises that would be broken, still hoping for love that would never come. She wished she could tell them that real love existed, patient love that waited without conditions, strong love that protected without possessing, generous love that gave without expecting payment. She wished she could tell them that their worth wasn't determined by other people's ability to see it, that their dreams weren't foolish just because someone else couldn't share them. But mostly, she wished she could tell them to hold on, to keep believing, to never stop hoping that somewhere there was someone who would see their true value and love them exactly as they deserved to be loved, because that love was worth waiting for, worth fighting for, worth believing in even when all evidence suggested it didn't exist. And sometimes, if you were very lucky and very patient, it found you at a train station when you thought you had nowhere left to go. The wind stirred through the cottonwoods, carrying the scent of sage and the promise of tomorrow. Clara Morrison smiled and walked into her house with her husband, ready to begin the rest of their story together. In the distance, a train whistle echoed across the prairie, carrying other travelers toward their own unknown destinies. But Clara no longer listened for trains. She was finally, completely, exactly where she belonged. The autumn of 1886 painted the Morrison Ranch in brilliant shades of gold and crimson, as if nature itself was celebrating the abundance that had come to define Clara's married life. She stood in the expanded kitchen garden, harvesting the last of the season's vegetables while her 6-month-old daughter slept peacefully in a basket nearby. Little Catherine Morrison, named for Jack's lost sister, had inherited her father's dark hair and her mother's green eyes, along with what Alina claimed was the Morrison family's stubborn streak. The past year had brought changes beyond Clara's wildest imaginings. The ranch had prospered under Jack's careful management and Clara's organizational skills, allowing them to purchase additional land and expand their cattle operations. More importantly, their partnership had deepened into something that transcended mere compatibility. They had become true collaborators in every aspect of their shared life. Elena had married Miguel Santos in a spring ceremony that rivaled Clara's own wedding for community enthusiasm. The couple had built a small house on the eastern edge of the property, where Elena continued managing the domestic operations, while Miguel oversaw the growing horse breeding program. Their own first child was expected before Christmas, and Elena glowed with the same contentment that had transformed Clara's appearance during her own pregnancy. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made Clara look up from her harvesting. A familiar figure rode toward the house. Tommy Carlyle, now foreman of the Morrison Ranch following Charlie's retirement to a small cabin near the creek. Tommy had matured considerably during his years with the outfit, developing the quiet competence that marked truly skilled ranch hands. "Mrs. Morrison," Tommy called, dismounting and removing his hat respectfully. Sorry to disturb your work, but there's a situation in town you should know about. Clara set down her basket, instantly alert. What kind of situation? Woman at the Jungjing train station. Been there since yesterday morning, waiting for someone who apparently ain't coming. Station master asked if we might know anything about her circumstances. Clara's heart clenched with familiar recognition. Another woman abandoned, another life disrupted by false promises and casual cruelty. The pattern was depressingly common. In frontier towns where men could disappear into the vast landscape without consequence. Is she alone? Has 2 young children with her. Boy about 8, girl maybe 5 or 6. They don't look like they've eaten proper in days. Clara was all ready. Untying her apron, her mind racing through possibilities and resources. Saddle a horse for me, Tommy, and ask Elena to come watch Catherine while I'm gone. Yes, ma'am. Jack said to tell you he's riding in from the north pasture if you need him. Tell him to meet me at the station. And Tommy? Have Elena pack a basket. Of food enough for 3 people, and then some. 20 minutes later, Clara rode toward Riverside with a sense of purpose that felt as natural as breathing. This was what love looked like in action, not just the romantic love she shared with Jack, but the broader love that connected all people who had experienced hardship and chosen compassion over callousness. The woman at the station was younger than Clara had expected, perhaps 22, with brown hair escaping from a once neat bun and a dress that showed the wrinkles of sleeping in public places. Her children huddled close to her on the platform bench, their eyes wide with the kind of weariness that came from too many disappointments. Clara approached slowly, not wanting to startle them. Excuse me, I'm Clara Morrison from the ranch outside town. I heard you might need assistance. The woman's defenses rose immediately. We're fine, thank you. Just waiting for my husband to return from his business meeting. The words were so familiar, so heartbreakingly similar to Clara's own desperate denials during those first days of abandonment, that Clara felt tears prick her eyes. Of course. But while you're waiting, perhaps you'd accept some food for the children? I brought more than I can possibly use. The mention of food broke through the woman's pride. Her son looked up hopefully, and Clara could see the hunger in his thin face despite his mother's attempts to maintain dignity. That's very kind, the woman said quietly. I'm Sarah Hendricks. These are my children, David and Mary. Clara unpacked Elena's generous basket, spreading food on the bench between them. As the children ate with barely restrained desperation, Sarah's story emerged in halting fragments. A husband who had promised opportunities in California, a journey that had progressed in stages with increasingly long delays, finally ending with his departure on yesterday's westbound train, while claiming he would return with tickets for the family. He said the tickets were too expensive to buy all at once, Sarah whispered. Said he'd go ahead and send for us when he'd secured employment, but ... But you don't think he's coming back, Clara finished gently. Sarah's composure cracked. I have $11 and nowhere to go. My family disowned me when I married Robert against their wishes. I don't even know anyone in this territory. Jack arrived as Sarah was wiping her eyes, his presence somehow making the platform feel safer and more manageable. Clara made quick introductions while he assessed the situation, with the same calm competence he brought to injured cattle or storm. Damage. Mrs. Hendricks, he said respectfully, my wife and I understand your situation better than you might expect. We'd like to offer you and your children temporary shelter while you decide what you'd like to do next. I can't impose. You wouldn't be imposing, Clara interrupted. You'd be helping us. We're expanding our operations and could use assistance with household management and child care. It would be employment, not charity. The offer transformed Sarah's expression from despair to cautious hope. You'd trust me with your children? When you don't know anything about my character or abilities? Clara exchanged a look with Jack, remembering their own first meeting on this very platform. Someone once took a chance on me when I had nothing to recommend me but determination to work hard. I'd like to pass that kindness along." As they loaded Sarah's meager belongings into the wagon, Clara reflected on the strange circular nature of grace. Her own salvation had come through the patience of people who saw value where others saw only problems. Now she had the opportunity to offer that same salvation to someone else, completing a cycle of compassion that had begun with her own desperate need. Little Mary Hendricks reminded Clara of herself at that age, watching adult conversations with solemn eyes, trying to understand why the world felt so uncertain. But unlike Clara's own childhood, marked by early loss and constant insecurity, Mary would grow up knowing that there were adults who could be trusted, that promises made by good people were kept, that kindness existed in the world for those willing to extend it to others. The wagon rolled toward the Morrison Ranch as sunset painted the sky in shades of amber and rose. Behind them, another train pulled into Riverside Station, carrying its cargo of dreams and disappointments toward destinations unknown. But Clara no longer wondered about those distant travelers or worried about their fates. Instead, she focused on the blessings within her reach: the husband whose love had transformed her understanding of her own worth, the sister-in-law who had become her dearest friend, the child who would grow up secure in the knowledge that she was wanted and cherished. And now, the opportunity to share that abundance with others who needed to learn that love was real, that patience existed, that some people could be trusted to keep their promises. As the ranch buildings came into view, Clara Morrison smiled with deep satisfaction. She had found her purpose not just in being loved, but in loving others, proving that the greatest gifts were those that multiplied when shared rather than diminished by division. The circle was complete. But the story would continue, written now in acts of grace rather than chapters of abandonment. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.